I really don't care whether I'm a Sufi or a Salafi or like whatever. I just want to follow the truth, and I want to study, and I want to increase my understanding, right? I didn't accept Islam and leave behind like, several relationships and quit jobs and whatever to be part of this sect or that sect. I really just want to follow the truth. Because the Salafi retort to the Mawlid will always be, the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, and the companions didn't do it.
Right.
Best. What else do you need? Okay. That's very convincing, right? It shifts the burden of proof, right? Okay. But the other side says we don't need a precedent because we're not instituting a new act of worship.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of Sultans and Sneakers. I'm your host, as always, Mahin the podcaster, and this is the podcast where we help Muslim men level up in life for the afterlife. And on today's show, I'm honored to have my good friend, Imam Tom Facchine, for the second time on the show, but first time in person.
Yep.
So Imam Tom Sheikh, welcome to the show. And I know you got a tight schedule here in Chicago, so definitely wanted to welcome you. Again.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure always to get together.
Yeah.
And be able to squeeze this in as well as
absolutely
the barakah.
Well, we had talked about this episode specifically because we had run into each other over the summer. Mm-hmm. First time we met in person was back in the summer. We were at an event. I'll keep it discreet, although maybe people who know. And there was an event, and there was like a family event. But there was one individual, and I guess in his family, he attended for a short time, and then he had to leave because he felt like there was too much, what you call innovation and whatnot. And I felt bad for him because it was like, there's a lot of benefit to the event. I openly said that, sometimes you just need a cleanse like that. Like you're in an environment of deen and like ibadah and practice and great for the family and all that for a week. Came back really rejuvenated. So I felt like he really missed out, And I spoke to him after, and it seems to be there's like a lot of misunderstanding about the concept of innovation or bid'ah and whatnot. So we were having breakfast. I think it was right before we left. You and I were having breakfast. We were talking about doing this episode. So we finally are making it happen. So
6 months later.
Yeah. Well, we definitely knew it was going to be this time. It was going to be you're going to be here for the Mass ICNIC convention, and we're going to go with that. So with that being said, when you I want to take a step back. You, as someone who converted to Islam and then went to go study at the Islamic University of Madinah, talk to me about the first time that you came across this term of innovation and how you understood it.
Okay, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu rasulillah. I can't remember a specific time, but I think there's some certain things about my pathway and my maturity through, becoming a Muslim and studying Islam that I think that there's some takeaway points for other people. I came through Islam definitely through Salafism, no doubt. Bilal Phillips. I took IOU courses back when it was Islamic Online University. Now it's, I think, Open University.
Yep.
I still have the certificates. I only was around sort of, Salafi Mashayikh and students of knowledge and stuff like that. So that was very much fundamentally what I came into Islam through. I think one of the things that was really important, though, because we have to give people their flowers too. It's like when it comes to the Salafi movement, I think that justifiably they are very, very concerned about innovation. Okay, we have to understand things in historical context, right? It's like what created, even if you think, because some people will say, oh, the Salafi movement, like blah, 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 bad, bad, bad. Let's look at the positives. Let's look at every single movement that has people behind it that means something, I believe at least, it strikes a chord for a reason.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Usually, most of the time. Okay, so why did the Salafi movement strike a chord with so many people? Because there had come a point in Muslim history where localized folk Islam had a lot of stuff going on that was against Islam.
Yep.
Whether it's against the Sharia, right? Like even in Medina today, okay, there's places, the outlying villages outside the city of Medina, it's a common practice that they don't give women their inheritance. Period.
Right.
Like we know that that's just Sharia, but that's not our cultural practice. It's like, bruh, it's like you're like in Medina, but that's like this cultural practice that they innovated that is against the Sharia.
Right.
There's others that are against the Aqidah. There are others that are not just about, like rejecting this practice or that practice or starting a new practice, but they're actually very close, uncomfortably close to shirk, if not shirk itself, right? The different sort of superstitions. And some of the people of Medina would explain some of these things to me. Like if somebody left, like a guest left out of your house, like throw a glass of water out after him, like through the doorway, like all these sorts of little superstitions, and then things that are even more than that, tying, threads to trees and, making wishes and tons of stuff, right? So the Salafi movement historically has so much purchase because many, if not all of these practices are wrong, right? They're not based in Islam, okay? There's sort of a, that's the irony of sort of the Westerners who chafe at the Salafi movement and still say that Islam needs to have a Protestant Reformation. If there was anything like a Protestant Reformation in Islam, it was the Salafi movement. Because similarly, the Catholics had, had all these accretions that they had sort of developed over hundreds and hundreds of years. And the Protestants were like, whoa, wait a second. Now, historically, that's instructive because the Protestants also went too far the other way. Yeah. Right? And so they basically said, no, okay, well, we're just personal, completely individualistic relationship with God. What's it? Sola Scriptura is like only scripture, right? No sort of intervention or interpretive layer, right? Through any sort of clergy or anything like that. Now, that's extremely historically important because the Salafi movement also has gone to some excesses, right? And I don't think that's deniable, even though, and we're going to talk about it as a monolith, even though, of course, no movement is a monolith, right? There are different strands. But I just think, and this is what it comes back to, and if I'm going to talk to young guys in particular or anybody, the takeaway is you just have to be mature, okay? Earlier today on Instagram, somebody had asked me tips for seeking knowledge. And after everybody says sincerity, so the sincerity is obviously there. After those two, discipline and maturity. Yep. Now, what do I mean when I say maturity, right? Discipline, everybody also understands. You have to have good habits, but maturity, that you have to, Sheikh Abdullah Shinqiti used to say, al-haq muwazza' baynana, is that the truth is divided up among us. Right. That means no individual has all of it right. Mm-hmm. Right. Now we say that, and we're so good in the Muslim community of paying lip service to these things. It's like, it's like everybody makes mistakes or everybody's wrong about something. But then we freak out when somebody, we disagree with them, or we act as if we have an expectation that someone has to be right 100% of the time, or that everyone, etc. You have to be able to be mature enough to be on a journey of truth discovery. Right. That's what it is. You are in this life on a process of trying to discover what's true. Yep. Right? Now, when it came to my own personal history, through the tawfiq of Allah, I benefited greatly from the Salafi movement. The Salafi movement is very textualist, right? It's very text-based, right? So in many non-Salafi circles, they've replaced the authority of the text with the authority of the person. Yeah. Now that has advantages when it comes especially to pedagogy and to subject formation, and you need to see living examples. But there's also some drawbacks too, which is like, well, what if somebody made something up along the way? Or what if somebody just got something wrong along the way? Or what if, and we see this a lot between the relationships between actual shuyukh, like sheikhs, and their students. The sheikh said or did something and he meant something specific, and now the students are taking it and making it into something that is bigger than it is, or they're misapplying it. That happens all the time, right? So, this very textualist approach, has a utility to it, right? It puts us back in, we're citing our hadith. We're looking, it's like, is this hadith authentic or not, right? That has a really important element to it. So flowers to the Salafi movement for that. I think it was very, very important. They also digitalized a lot of ilm. Like when it comes to the books and things like that that were put online, like the Salafi movement, like absolutely, was head and shoulders above the rest when it came to that. So give everyone their flowers, right? But realize with maturity that there's always going to be things that are wrong or excesses or that are taken out of context or they're just like missing, And so the first sort of things, I think the first clue that it was for me that sort of brought up some of my dissatisfaction, or at least maybe, I don't want to say outgrowing it, but maybe outgrowing it. Yeah,
so let me stop. Yeah. So your background in religion prior to Islam, was it more, were you like a Protestant?
Yeah, well, Protestant and Catholic, because my parents are both. Yeah.
But Salafism, was it, because a lot of times, so Salafiyah, you'll fall into it. to be on any group, whoever you fall into, when you first when you first either convert to Islam or you become practicing, it's the group you're just happens to be there.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Same for you?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, definitely. I think the people that I came in contact with first, they were mostly Salafis. But I also think for converts, there's an interesting sort of appeal, because one of the really appealing calls of the Salafi movement is that there seems to be almost an analogy that's being made between the purity of Islam compared to other religions.
Yeah.
And then the purity of the Salafi da'wah and the Salafi sort of style compared to the other sects, if you will, right? So there's an easy analogy there. If you're coming from a place where, the Trinity is nonsensical, right? The Bible's a mess, historically, as a document, like all the saints and feast days and whatever. And then you find the simple truth of Islam, you're like, wow, this is so intuitive, it makes so much sense. And then you have, people telling you just the Quran and Sunnah and the understanding of the Salaf. Like, what could be more simple? Like, there's an appeal to that simplicity. And that appeal is mostly true and mostly good, but it has to be made good on. And that was sort of like my first, talking about historically, my sort of relationship with it. I started to have certain indications that even the Salafi movement wasn't living up to that slogan. Okay. And there were, I guess, two things, right? So one thing was that I studied in the Kulliyah Sharia, right? So in the Faculty of Islamic Law. When I got to Medina, I had the impression that if the scholars had differed over something, then it was most likely that one scholar hadn't heard the hadith or hadn't come across the evidence. That was Bilal Phillips's book. May Allah reward him. I benefited so much from him. He's going to get a lot of good deeds on the Day of Judgment, inshallah. But like his one book,
Evolution of Fiqh.
Evolution of Fiqh. Yeah, I was thinking the Arabic version of Tarikh al-Tashri', which is what he based the book on. Like, left me, whether it was his intention or not, left me with the impression that accounted for most of the differences of opinion between ulama. Okay, so now you're in Kulliyat Sharia in Medina. You're studying Bidayat al-Mujtahid by Ibn Rushd, right? Every semester you're memorizing 125 fiqh issues, masail, with all of the different aqwal, right? The opinions and the adillah and the evidence and the reason, and Ibn Rushd, he focuses on the reason why there was disagreement. So I started counting. I said, okay, how many or what percentage of these disagreements is Ibn Rushd saying that are responsible because one person didn't hear the evidence or one person didn't hear the hadith? And in the first semester, out of 120 masail, I only found a single one. Every single other issue, they were using the same evidence. It was just they were disagreeing in how they understood the evidence. Right. So if you take the example of how much of your head to wipe over, right? Wamsahu bi ru'usikum, Allah says in the Quran, right? Wipe your heads. Okay? That single letter, ba, bi ru'usikum, what does it mean? Does it mean all of your head? Does it mean part of your head? Does it mean most of your head? Does it mean just like the smallest amount that could possibly be called your head? Those are the four different opinions of the madhahib. Yeah. Right? Off of a single letter. They all use the same evidence. It's just about how to understand the evidence. Right? So that was my first sort of like, okay. I stopped counting after that semester, obviously. I was like, there's much more to the disagreements and the differences between the ulama than just a lack of information or an asymmetry of knowledge. There's actually discrete sort of methodologies of legal reasoning that are responsible for how, downstream that they decided that they're going to prioritize this evidence over that evidence, or, combine it like this or whatever. Okay. The second thing that sort of, was like, just made me wonder was in some Salafi circles, though not most of them, Abu Taymiyyah is trashed. Astaghfirullah. You have to edit that out. Abu Hanifa.
Abu Hanifa, right.
Yeah. Abu Hanifa is trashed.
Yeah.
In a whole rivulet of Salafiyya, sort of whatever you want to call it, the La Madhab, rivulet or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Things that are really, really inappropriate, like say about any scholar, let alone one of the founders of the four madhahib.
He's accused of irja.
Well, yeah, right, exactly. And then we get into, alhamdulillah, we studied irja al-fuqaha and how it's different from like actual irja. Like there's no thamara to the actual, there's no consequence to the actual debate. It's really just sort of semantic. But yeah, he's trashed. Now, if you take literally the statement of the Prophet ﷺ that establishes the primacy of the 3 first generations, where does Abu Hanifa belong in that? He's there.
Well, he's the first of the 4 Imams too.
He's in the Salaf. He is a Salaf, right?
Right.
He makes it within under the cut.
Sure.
Right? Of who are the authoritative generations. So it's like, wait a second, like how does this add up? You guys are calling yourselves Salafis, right? And saying that you follow Salaf. And yet here's a Salaf and you're trashing him. I don't understand how, and that sort of like was a moment where what I realized over years of study was that we do not, in the English language, have a good sense of the diversity that existed among the Salaf. Because where we're at with our religious literacy is simply that anybody can quote one Salaf and then claim that this represents all of the Salaf. And basically now the burden is on you to prove that wrong. You would have to go and do istiqra. You would have to read enough to find another counterexample to disprove it. Example comes here with Hajr, right? With the idea of boycotting.
Yep.
Right? So I get asked all the time, probably every week, like, why are you talking with this person? Why are you on this platform with this person? Why are you here with this person? Don't you know they this? Of course I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't live under a rock. I would like to live under a rock. I don't, unfortunately. So I'm aware, but I've also seen people change. I've seen organizations change, right? I have changed. كَذَلِكَ كُنْتُم مِّن قَبْلِ فَمَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمْ, right? It's like, so part of my sincerity is wanting others to continue to improve and better themselves. We live in a time where I don't think Hajr works usually, or at least Hajr should be really saved. Like boycotting should be saved for like the really bad stuff, you know? And it was not the practice of all the Salaf. It was the practice of some of them. Yes, it was. Yeah. But it was not the practice of all of them. Just as how to engage with the ruler, whether to take appointments from the ruler or to stay away, not touch the ruler or his sort of whatever. You have people who refused, such as Abu Hanifa, and then you have his own students who accepted positions, right? So you find a certain amount of diversity within the actions of the Salaf. And sometimes that diversity is not represented or is not presented to the people, right? There is sort of a quotation of one, and then this is what the Salaf did categorically, and if you do anything other than that, then you're against the Salaf or you're not embodying the Salaf. So these were sort of some of the things that were of interest to me, right, when I was in Medina, and sort of continuing to try to mature and try to develop, and you know.
You mentioned Ibn Rushd, right?
Yeah.
Ibn Rushd, was he an Ash'ari?
I don't know.
You don't know. We don't know what his background is. Okay, but like, because that's such an eye-opening experience. Mm-hmm. Because there's this, whether it's true, you know, there's this narrative that the University of Medina at some point, maybe not the founding, but definitely seems like 80s and 90s was meant to push the Salafi dawah.
Sure.
Right?
No, and it was at its founding.
Okay.
Yeah. If you look at the people who put it together, Baz and
you're right.
Yeah.
But didn't have more Ikhwani influences back then as well?
Well, Saudi Arabia had no problem with Ikhwan, with the Ikhwan, up until fairly recently, up until basically the Gulf War, the 90s.
Gotcha.
Right? So yes, I mean there were tons of what we would call now Ikhwani professors and intellectuals that were in Saudi Arabia and the Islamic University of Madinah.
Right. So could they have, if they're designed to push this agenda, right? Why would they include a book like that in the curriculum? I guess.
Right. Well, here's one thing that I tell people too, because some people who on the other side are prejudiced against Medina, they'll say, "Oh, okay, this guy's a Medina grad. We know what he's about." Scholars for dollars and all this other stuff. But, you know, there was an academic that I benefited, this phrase that I've kept with me all my life that's very, very profound and accurate, that the map is not the terrain. The terrain is one thing and the map is a simplification of it, right? So any institution such as Medina University, you might think that you know it, but it's more diverse than you realize, right? There are lots of different students there. There's lots of different professors there, especially in my time when I was there, 2015 to 2020, when the student body and the university was expanding very rapidly.
Right.
So like in the 80s when it was very small, there was much more control over a small outfit. But, once it expands, not everybody knows what everybody's doing. I was part of the group where they finally started the standardized curriculum and standardized tests and stop people from going off the manhaj,
Sure.
literally in the sense of like not teaching the syllabus and stuff like that.
Right.
So, I mean, but there's also something to be said there between, again, the maturity of the ulama versus the sort of crudity of their followers. Because you have, if you look at Bin Baz's correspondences with Qardawi, right? You see a lot of tremendous respect. Now, if you take a Salafi and an Ikhwani today, you won't find that respect.
Yeah.
Right? You see the different ways that ulama treat each other across the aisle, so to speak. It's very different. So that's not a surprise to me. These are books that are studied. They're part of the Torah. They're part of the tradition. Why wouldn't you study Ibn Rushd?
Sure.
Are you going to avoid, if you're going to expunge every Ash'ari from the syllabus, like think about that for a second.
Right.
Like you're going to have a very, very bare bone syllabus. No more Arba'in Nawawi. People are going to argue that point. Like, okay, you can argue it, but there's others that are like less controversial that of ascription that that's not the attitude of the ulama.
Yeah.
That's not the attitude of the ulama. The ulama teach books if the books have merit to them, if they're by trustworthy scholars, even in hadith, even in the science of hadith. You look at the muhaddithun, who do they take hadith from? Do they impose a purity check of creed like that on the hadith the narrators? Not to that degree, right? And they will mention it in their books of Rijal, right? They'll say, oh yeah, he believed in this, but he was known to be trustworthy, and so we're relating his hadith. But anyway, the issue that, and maybe this is of interest to you, the issue that really kind of expanded my mind from a fiqh perspective was the Mawlid issue.
Okay.
This was something that, I had a couple of professors in particular that were very sort of open-minded and challenged you to think. And so in one of these professors, basically was bringing up, he was very fair. He was very, very fair in the sense that I've always believed sort of a priori, whether I've practiced it or not, maybe not always, but I've always believed somewhere that you should listen to what someone says about themselves rather than listen to someone else tell you about somebody else. Right?
Fair enough.
So, most of the time, at least, right? Because people have biases and they misrepresent and things like that. And so if I want to know what somebody believes about an issue, then I should hear from themselves, right? And in usul al-fiqh, we say, lazim al-qawl laysa biqawl, is that what you're saying somebody's position necessitates is not what they're actually saying. You can't collapse that gap. A lot of people do this in arguments in order to sort of, it's just like the Zionists do that right now. Yep. They're saying it's like, from the river to the sea is genocidal. No, it's not.
Anti-Semitic,
right. No, it's not. Yeah. Shut up. It's like, so that's the way of the Zionists.
right.
To say that, your statement implies this, therefore you're saying this. No. We don't accept that, right? So I was interested, I was a card-carrying Salafi, and I obviously, shunned the Mawlid and thought it was just goofy Sufi this and goofy Sufi that, like for a long time. Until I actually wanted to study it academically. Like, well, what are they saying about it? Like, are they actually saying that this is an Eid? I mean, like Eid, like Eid al-Fitr and Eid and what I found was tafsir. I found a much more mature conversation that both sides were really speaking past one another, right? Like both sides that from the people, even from not just to throw Salafis under the bus. Salafis that were criticizing the Mawlid categorically were not understanding what the Sufi scholars were saying that were justifying the Mawlid. And even the Sufi laymen were not responding with anything meaningful. Like they're just completely talking past each other.
It would just be like, oh, you guys don't let the Prophet say them.
Yeah,
just pejoratives back and forth.
Right, something dumb like that. It's like, and that's why I'd say like maturity. Like if you have to be a mature person to be a student of knowledge. I really don't care whether I'm a Sufi or a Salafi or like whatever. I just want to follow the truth and I want to study and I want to increase my understanding, right? I didn't accept Islam and leave behind several relationships and quit jobs and whatever to be part of this sect or that sect. I really just want to follow the truth.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean I'm right and I've got it all figured out. But it's like I hope that I keep moving closer and closer and closer until the day that I die, inshallah. So when it came to the actual academic discussion, right, it's actually quite interesting. Because the Salafi retort to the Mawlid will always be, the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, and the companions didn't do it.
Right.
Best. What else do you need? Okay. That's very convincing, right? It shifts the burden of proof, right? Okay. But the other side says we don't need a precedent because we're not instituting a new act of worship.
Right.
Okay. Now that's a subtle point, and not all Sufis believe this. So for the ones that do say like whatever,
it is actually
then it's a problem.
Right.
And Sheikh Hassan Adidu clarifies this. The best video I've seen on this issue is by him. He lines it out very succinctly, if you're looking for the 30-second short, that to celebrate the Mawlid with the intention of an Eid is haram and bid'ah. And to celebrate the Mawlid with an intention of what do they call it, maslaha mursala, then it is acceptable. It's yajuz. And a person who, leaves it for whatever, then they have that too. That's fine.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, when do you need a precedent? When do you need a precedent? That's the open-ended question. And if you're looking to be a mature student of knowledge, open-ended questions get you a lot further than yes or no, black or white questions.
Yep.
Right? I always try to bring things back to open-ended questions. So like, what sorts of situations require a precedent from the Salaf and which don't? Right? So, broadly speaking, acts of worship require a precedent from the Salaf, and things that aren't worship don't. Good, easy.
Yep.
Okay? If we required a precedent for things that weren't worship, then we wouldn't be able to have microphones. Okay, maybe someone would disagree because they'll say, well, they didn't have the ability to have microphones. Okay, granted. Then let's say we wouldn't have separation between the genders in the masjid because the genders were not separated in the masjid in the way they are today in North America at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. It was women behind the men. They had the ability to build two-story buildings. They had two-story buildings, but they did not do that, right? So according to that, if we're going to take the logic all the way, okay, then that would be, that would be an innovation.
Sure.
Okay, like in order to achieve like some sort of more whatever the Prophet ﷺ didn't do, right? So no, we're saying that this is something that is not innovation. Stop signs, cars, microphones, even like the way that we do gender segregation, like with enhanced sort of techniques or whatever. This is all, and we can argue about that last example with gender segregation, but that'll bring us to the next point. Anything that's not worship in and of itself, you don't need a precedent for it. Okay, the asl is jawaz. The asl, the default ruling is permissibility. Until you have something specific, explicit, that it's contradicting.
So don't Salafis treat it almost like more like a creedal issue than a fiqh issue?
In which way?
The Mawlid is example, because it's almost like that's the way I perceive it. Because when you use the example, because like maybe the common dumb retort is like, well, the Prophet ﷺ didn't drive a car, so why are you driving a car? Right. That obviously doesn't. I don't think that retort makes any sense.
No, it doesn't make sense.
Right? But I'm saying that's an issue of mu'amilat, of an action, yes. Right? Versus like, it seems like that's more, because, I've always understood bid'ah from the way Salafis look at it is like as a creedal thing.
Okay.
More so than a fiqh thing.
Yeah, it's both. It has shades of both, and that's actually part of the ambiguity.
Yeah.
But so let's zoom in on that other category, though, and it'll become clear. So like if we had said there's worship and non-worship you don't need a precedent. Everybody agrees to that. Easy.
Yep, right.
Let's now, we've only have on the table, we have worship.
Yep.
Are all acts of worship the same?
No.
No, they're not.
Right.
Okay, you have some acts of worship that are specific. Okay, let's even go before that. Some acts of worship that are pure acts of worship, and some that can become worship. Okay,
right. As
we know that you can go and make a living, and it might not be an act of worship, but if you have the intention, it becomes an act of worship. Okay,
sure.
So that's one difference. There's other types of worship where they are very specific and limited, and there's other that are more categorical. Okay, so the salawat. Right? To make a salah is very limited. Okay? There are only 5 in a day. Okay? To make a 6th salah is haram. It's innovation. And to believe that there is, that's aqidah. To do it, that's fiqh. It's both wrong. Okay? To take a 3rd Eid is also haram. Yeah, we only have two. The Prophet ﷺ said, I've replaced what you used to practice with the two Eids, right? So there you go. That's what you have. However, there are some acts of worship that are more general and are a broader category of worship that are not subject to the same restrictions as something like salah. For example, dhikr. Okay? Remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dhikr is not as restrictive of a category of worship as salah is. Okay? That means that if you were to put together a wird, right? It's like you have in the morning a certain amount of dhikr that you do. Okay? And it's not exactly what the Prophet ﷺ did, or it's not exactly tied to a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. But categorically it is. You're taking subhanallah, you're going to recite 500 times. There's no nas that tells you to recite it 500 times. Okay?
Sure.
Allahu Akbar, 500 times. Like whatever, 500 times. Or you're going to do it for an hour. You say, I have 1 hour before I have to get ready for work. For 1 hour, I'm going to make dhikr. Okay? Have you committed innovation?
As long as the way I would, if I was Salafi, I would say, as long as you don't dictate that 1 hour repetitively over and over again.
Okay, so
as
now
a ritual.
we have two issues. So one issue is intention.
Yep.
Now, if somebody intends that this particular wird that I'm doing has a special merit with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And it was not revealed in the Quran or the Sunnah, then that's an innovation. Yep. No problem.
Sure.
So that's you're mistaken. You're attributing something to the revelation that isn't there. It was never there.
Yep.
Okay? But to specify time now, let's push this. Let's zoom in on this. Okay, we're going to specify time. 1 hour after I pray Fajr, or let's say you get an hour break in the morning at work, 10 to 11. Yeah, I need some sleep here. 10 to 11. That's your time for making dhikr. What's your intention? You're specifying that time. You're doing it every day. Is your intention that specific time is blessed to make that dhikr? Or is it simply part of your schedule because that's the time that you have to make it? If you don't make the dhikr in that hour, you're not going to make it during the day.
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
So is that an innovation? To do it every single day at the same time, simply because that's when your schedule allows it. You don't have the intention. If you don't care, to you could do it at 10 or 12 or whatever.
That's the window you have.
But that's the window you have.
Yeah.
Okay, haven't you ever seen the old men with the little things for their Quran?
Yeah.
Muraja, right? Like they have, and they write it down.
Yep.
And they specify reciting Quran is also a category of worship.
Right.
Okay, that's not as specific and limited as salah. Okay, so if somebody, they have the only hour they have, the wife takes the kids for a walk from 5 to 6 p.m. Every day, 5 to 6 p.m. And brothers, you should go with your wife on those walks. But let's say she doesn't want you to go. Then you say, that's my Quran hour. You do it every day. Are you committing an innovation because you specified that time? You're not committing innovation because you specified that time. You don't have the intent that that hour is somehow blessed or from the revelation or something like this. It's simply a matter of scheduling.
Yep.
Okay?
Sure.
Okay. The Mawlid issue comes into another category of worship or a type of worship that is not as limited as salah, and that is love for the Prophet ﷺ. Nobody denies that loving the Prophet ﷺ is worship. But it's also a category of worship. Okay? A category of worship that you have more leeway into achieving it, amplifying it, assisting it, developing it than you do with the salah or similar acts of worship. Okay? So, if someone writes a poem, okay, about the Prophet ﷺ, and this poem, it doesn't have any clear haram in it.
Yep.
Okay? And it makes you cry out of love for Allah and love for His Messenger ﷺ, which we know is praiseworthy.
Sure.
And you decide every week you're going to read this poem once to try to develop this love inside of you. Have you committed an innovation?
No.
You don't intend. You don't believe that this is something from wahi or this is something whatever. It's a matter of scheduling an actual effect now, practically speaking.
Right.
You read the poem, it reminds you of the afterlife, it reminds you of your death, It reminds you of your accountability in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Right.
You're moved to tears.
Yeah.
Is that innovation to say once a week at this particular time, that's just what my schedule dictates, I'm going to sit down and read this poem?
But when people do it, like let's say the night of Jummah.
Okay, well, we have to, with fiqh,
I got
in
you.
fiqh, you got to separate the issues,
All right, okay.
right? You know, because now we're separating here
Right.
the principle.
Yep.
Because when people say Mawlid, there's things that people call Mawlid that are ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay, that are things that are clearly haram, right? But what people are calling Mawlid, there's actually a variety of practices
Yeah.
that are going on, that people are using the word Mawlid to describe, right? The principle of it is that it is a time that the schedule allows, that you have set aside
Right.
to develop in your heart love for Allah and love for the Prophet ﷺ. And that in and of itself is permissible, as long as you have the proper intention, that you're not taking this as an Eid, that you're not saying that this hour is specifically blessed or whatever, something sort of ukhrawi, something that, you know, sort of ilm al-ghaib, knowledge of the unseen, that you don't have any license for. Okay? That in and of itself is permissible. Everything else comes later. Now you can get into the text, what's the content of the poem? Some people, they're drums, some people even more than that, like whatever. Okay, we can say that this is haram, or this is haram, whatever. But the idea of it, is that there is a category of worship that is broad enough and wide enough and general enough that there's more leeway to take different ways to develop it and to achieve it. That's the main issue.
Gotcha.
Right? And so when I first read that and sort of came across that conversation, like, this is very interesting, and it's very deep, and it's very nuanced, and it's very subtle, and nobody's talking about it, right? Really, what it has become is just an identitarian sort of issue, and that is a problem. And I'll say this for anybody who's watching, and you know, that one of the things, or maybe the main thing, that Bani Israel was blamed for in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah and Al-Imran especially, are tribalizing the religion. Okay? Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them a book, gave them a prophet. And the proper interpretation of that reality was to say, this is our agreement with Allah. We have to do X, Y, and Z in order to achieve what Allah promised us. Instead of that, they turned it into a special status, favored nation status. Oh, we've been given a book and a prophet. We must be better than everybody else. That is a huge sin and a huge mistake. Tribe over truth was their problem, whereas we're supposed to be truth over tribe. Why does Allah tell us the story of Bani Israel so many times in the Quran? So that we can pat ourselves on the back and say, oh, those misguided fools. No, because, and some of the Mufassirin have said this, we are the most like Bani Israel. We are, the Prophet ﷺ is the most like Musa. I believe As-Sa'di says this in his tafsir.
Right.
And others say that our ummah is most like Bani Israel. We are more liable to suffer from the same things that they suffered from. Okay, so what we see on the Mawlid issue and other issues is a tribalization of the truth. People are more concerned in my group's right than they are with actually getting to the truth of the matter. If you were to grant this and have this conversation with somebody, like who, let's say that they're practicing the Mawlid in a problematic way, okay? You could actually say, hey, ya akhi, this thing is maybe okay in principle, but here and here you're going too far and you need to rein it in. Is a lot different of a conversation than goofy Sufi, you guys are all just off the minhaj. There's no, the Prophet ﷺ never did this. It's like whatever. Okay? And the shoe goes on, we'll put the shoe on the other foot too. We'll put the shoe on the other foot because there are many scholars who said that the Mawlid is haram from their own ijtihad. Right. So there has to be respect back and forth. There's some Sufis who think that if you don't if you don't celebrate the Mawlid, then you don't love the Prophet ﷺ or things like that. No. There needs to be mutual respect on both sides, right? But we have to resist the attempt to make a caricature of the other side. And we have to really strive to understand the other side and what they're saying, right? Even when I was still in Medina, you know what I read? I read Al-Busiri's, the Burda.
Right.
everybody, the only thing I had heard about the Burda is how bad it was.
Right.
Because in Medina, like whatever, I believe I remember reading something from Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen that said there's kufr bawah in it. It was like clear kufr and stuff like that. I was like, whoa, this thing must be really, really bad. You know? But then I eventually one day I read it for myself. And I didn't only read it. I read the shuruhat of it. I read the explanations of it. Okay? And I found things that I disagreed with and found were problematic.
Yeah.
But I also found some of the representations of it a caricature. I found some of the things that were said to be misrepresentations of it and unfair.
Sure.
Right? And there are things that I don't agree with, like that are in there.
Even to this day.
Yeah, even to this day.
Sure.
Even to this day. But there are parts that make me cry.
Yeah.
Right? There are parts that remind me of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remind me of my death, remind me of my sins, and especially, there's the couple lines where he talks about, I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala divides his mercy according to the people who sin the most.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think in the 10th part, in the final chapter, like some parts are beautiful and move the heart and move the soul. Right? So again, it's about maturity, right? We have to, like, anybody who stands up and says the Burda is just like this person is a murtad, this person has left the deen, anybody who said like this is shirk, like whatever, slow down. This is a caricature. That's not true. That's not what the people who read it and even agree with all of it believe. Even the points that I disagree with, I read through their explanations and their understandings of what they think it means and what they believe. And I disagree with some of the things, but at least I understand their argument, right? And the same is true on the other side. If you have somebody who's like, I don't want to go close to this thing. It's too close for comfort for me. Like, I'm going to stay away from it. It's like, okay, then respect that as well. It's not something that's wajib. It's not something that's necessarily part of the deen.
Was there an event that triggered your interest in the academic study?
I've always just been someone that has to know. That's why when I accepted Islam, I knew that I would have to go abroad at some point and study, because I was never, ever someone who was just content to take someone else's word for it. In the ultimate sense, that obviously along the way you have to take people's word for it to a certain extent. But I always wanted to get to the bottom of things. I always wanted to understand. I always found it interesting and fascinating, So, yeah, I mean, that's basically it. So, I mean, I think the takeaway point, I know we don't have a ton of time here. I know the takeaway point for most people is that honestly, we treat the kuffar better than we treat each other as brothers and sisters in Islam. And that has to change. Sure. And if Palestine in the last 3 months hasn't taught you anything, like, this has to change. You have to. I saw a video. It was from Habib Ali al-Jifri. Okay, it's not someone that I follow or I don't know his stuff, like whatever, and you know. But it was actually in a video by Knowledge North. Okay. And so props to him for being fair. Because he showed this video of Habib al-Jifri responding to the accusation that he sold out the Muslims, or he's a normalizer, or something of this nature. And he gets choked up. And he says that I would sacrifice my life for the Salafi brother. Even the Salafi brother that wants to call me an innovator or even like make takfir of me or whatever. Now, some people who are critical of that individual, they'll say, oh, well, he's whatever. I don't care. I don't care about that. The point is that thing is where we should be. Right? That your Muslim brother, Sufi, Salafi, right? Deobandi, Ikhwani, you should be ready to die for your brother. You should be ready to die for your sister. Right? The kuffar don't care about these differences. No. And that's not to say that they don't have any effect. But you have to take, where are we at right now? And what corrective action do we need? If we were to the point where we were like not making some necessary distinctions, then maybe we could say, okay, hold on now. But that's not where we are. We're at the point where every minute distinction, we're treating it like it's enormous. Like, so the corrective action is that we have to have more loyalty towards each other. We have to have more just dedication to each other. We are our team, right? Inna al-mu'minina wal-mu'minat, right? Ba'duhum awliya'u ba'd, right? We are supposed to be the awliya of each other, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't specify this sect or that sect only. Like the Salafis are only the awliya of the other Salafis. Or the Sufis are only the awliya of the other Sufis. That's not how it goes. We are each other's awliya. We have to protect each other. Now, the only caveat to that is that, okay, sometimes geopolitically, there's people who sell you out.
Yeah.
That's a different situation.
Right.
People who sell you out, all right, that's different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we've seen that when it comes to Palestine.
Sure.
But let's not also caricaturize these things.
Yeah.
Because you'll find Sufis on both sides, and you'll find Salafis on both sides. There are Salafis that have sold out the Palestinians. There are Sufis who have sold out the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. There are Salafis who have gone to bat for the Palestinians, and there are Sufis who have gone to bat for the Palestinians. It's not always so simple, right? So if we're drawing the circle of who's your awliya, who are we together with, it has to be, it's broader than we think at this moment.
Right. And that's the collective understanding as far as how we interact with each other. And I think also the reason I wanted you to talk about this and break this down, because I just didn't want to, sometimes people, like, there's personality types. Dr. Muhammad Gillan talks about this. Dr. Muhammad Gillan, he trends Sufi, Ash'ari, and all that stuff. No secret there. But he openly has talked about, like, when he gets premarital counseling, he's like, if you're a Salafi, go find a Salafi girl. Because there's also tendencies that you have that your personality may gravitate towards, right? And I think I wanted you to get into this a little bit, because there are some people who might be like personality type towards a Sufi, but they're in a Salafi environment, and they might like find some inspiration or like some peace or sakina with the Mawlid or some of these practices or a tariqah, but then they just know it's just haram, this is bid'ah, this is kufr, and then they're kind of selling themselves short, right? And that's why I wanted you to kind of break this down a little bit. So
yeah, I think that we don't necessarily have to look at it as a competition. We can look at it as complementary,
right?
And just like you have different masajid that are offering 20 or 8 rakat in Ramadan, you can have communities where there's a Sharia-minded Sufi community,
right?
And there's a moderate Salafi community, and there's a whatever Ikhwani community or whatever, and they can all get along, and you can go to multiple. And you can, maybe this is kind of like your inner circle of people at one, but then that doesn't mean you're not going to pray at the other one, or you're not going to attend Jummah there, or you're not going to pray behind him, pray behind the innovator or the fasiq or whatever. Come on. Like, that stuff it's inappropriate. So that's the level. Yeah. Nobody's asking you to go and just like, bang your head up against the wall with people that you can't stand, but again, we're taking where we're at now and where we should be. That's right. We should have a greater degree of cooperation and mutual respect and love than we currently see.
And perhaps you're coming from an area where that kind of unity is kind of envisioned.
Perhaps.
If you know, you know.
If you know, you know.
All right, Imam Tom, if someone wants to reach out to you or connect, what's the best way to do so?
You can find me on social media. Any serious inquiries, Imam Tom Facchine, my Imam first name, last name at gmail.com.
Okay.
I'll talk to anybody if I have time for it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you making time for us today.
Always.
And hopefully this won't be the second of many more podcasts.
Inshallah. God bless you.
I mean, for our listeners out there, if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at info@sultansandsneakers.com. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/sultansandsneakers. For my special guest, Imam Tom Facchine, I'm your host, Maheen the Podcaster, signing off. Assalamu alaikum.